Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a special to Auld Heids that were called Right to Reply. As you'll know, you will recognise our combatants here tonight, who are basically all well-known bloggers who were dissed by a well-known MP from Perthshire earlier on in the week. So we have Grousebeater, well-known essayist, commonly known as the common man's philosopher. Polymath, his friends say that his politics are crap. He splits between various subjects and reviewing films so that we don't have to watch them. Then we've got Barrheadboy. You can take the boy out of Barrhead. You can stick him in the shadow of Gaudy Cathedral, surround him with Estelada waving Catalanas, but you still can't take Barrhead out of the boy. Then we've got Peter Bell, curmudgeon old reprobate that he is. Seems to have like lost more than his sense of humour when he's been locked in for the last 6 months. Iain Lawson, former SNP fundraiser, which Peter Murrow will probably be on the phone on Tuesday. Author of Years for Scotland, and former honorary councillor of Estonia. And last but not least, Jason McCann, aka Jeggett, former man of the cloth, turned journalist and blogger. Jeggett's broken off eggs in a political debate to make a rather large omelette, and which could get him into the Guinness Book of Records if he hadn't drunk all the Guinness. So welcome to the show, guys. The floor's yours. Was just you are welcome to it, and we're looking forward to hear what you've got to say.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, just welcome from me. As you know, in the pre-discussion before we started recording, we tried to produce an idea that would allow everyone to have their say on whatever subject they wanted, and then open it up for major discussion. This is your platform. It's your right to reply on your own behalf, and I believe perhaps on behalf of an awful lot of people in Scotland who are frustrated at what's going on. But Jason, over to you first, as we talked earlier.
Over to me. My job to ask the first question, is it?
It is indeed, my friend.
Well, I personally, I was most interested in this accusation of intolerance. Intolerance has a very specific meaning. You know, I spoke to a solicitor. I said I would seek legal advice, and apparently I don't have a leg to stand on because intolerance is vague enough to run under the radar of being accused of homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism, racism, but yet it's coded enough for, are we allowed to, well, Pete Wishart. It was coded enough for Pete Wishart to call us intolerant, you know, a collective of intolerant people. So that was coded enough for his listeners and his readers to understand that we are all a bunch of raving, I don't know, anti-English racists, whatever they choose to interpret. So yeah, I mean, as per the example, I'd like to offer it to Peter and say, Peter, how do you like being an intolerant blogger a la Pete Wishart?
Yeah, I'm quite fine with being intolerant. There are things that are worth being intolerant of.
Of course.
Obviously, I can't be extremely intolerant because I vote for Pete Wishart every election. So, you know, there's a hell of a lot of tolerance involved in that. But yeah, there are things that you shouldn't be intolerant of. It's like when another accusation is that we're angry. And this is just a way of trying to undermine and devalue somebody else's arguments instead of allowing that this argument comes from reason and from intellect. You say that it's coming from emotion. Well, yeah, well, fine, there's some emotion in my arguments, obviously, but that doesn't alter the fact that there is reason there. And that reason, but it leads me to a certain amount of anger and a certain amount of intolerance. Like I say, there are some things that are worth being intolerant of. And some of the things that are happening in the Yes movement and in the SNP are are things that we shouldn't tolerate. So, you know, if being intolerant means that you're just not prepared to tolerate certain kinds of behaviour, then I'm intolerant. Have I got to ask somebody else a question
You
now?
pass the parcel if you like, Peter. You pass on a question you think is relevant.
I'm going to get
a
what
more.
Peter said.
Sorry, Gareth.
I can add to what Peter said, because you brought up a very good point that people watching this video should take note of. You've just said that the politician, Peter Wishart, denounced people like you as a threat to all human life on the planet, is somebody that you vote for. So in other words, he completely forgets not only that he's speaking down to voters, his own voters, but he's actually telling the Scottish public that they have absolutely no right to an opinion if it differs with his. And one has to say that this is an intolerable situation, and opinion like Pete Wishart's ought to really be thrown out the window. I say that from all I've heard, Mr. Wishart is a very good constituency MP. I take that at face value. But just the same, the bunker mentality that the SNP leading figures have assumed of late, really, it has to be thrown off, and thrown off fast. I'll leave that to be picked up by Peter.
Can I just say that I know Pete Wishart reasonably well, and that he's not a bad person at all. And I have always maintained, I mean, for all the way he talks about me, he talks like that because he doesn't think before he speaks. He's not a very thoughtful person. If you've read his blog and you've read some of the things that he comes out with on his blog, you'll know that he's not a great one for thinking things through. But at the same time, he's a very good constituency MP, and he's also a very good parliamentarian for the party. He's got massive experience. He knows how it works. So I think this actually counters his argument at all. I mean, altogether, because I can be totally intolerant of his attitude to the independence campaign and people who differ with his views. But at the same time, I can argue that he is an excellent constituency MP and an excellent parliamentarian. I just wish he was capable of that kind of duality. Yeah.
Well, you know, I would just like to remind people that of late, the SNP seem to forget that we are members of the public. At least I regard myself as a member of the public. It's just that having sat in a few SNP meetings around 2013 and 2014 and 2015 before I let my membership lapse, I found that the people around me were very nice and very appealing, but they didn't really use the skills that I had. I just felt I particularly was wasting my time. So I had to make a decision, and that was, how do I help promote greater civil rights for Scotland? Well, there's this wonderful thing called the internet. I think I'll open a site. I then looked at the Wings site, which I'm sure will come up later in this discussion, and saw that Stuart Campbell had cornered the market in attacking newspapers. And I didn't want to copy that or just whatever topic was coming up that week. So I decided to choose the long form method of communication, the essay, so that I could maybe teach myself weaknesses in my own argument. I still regard myself as a member of the public. So although Pete Wishart didn't name me, I might have come under his rejoinder of all the others. I still think it's insulting, and I think it's a really worrying trend that some of the leading grandees of the SNP have started to pick up on. I mean, we're not that far away when they join with the right-wing journalists in our newspapers and get two-page spreads that I, in particular, am never allowed to answer, where they denounce us. They're literally denouncing us as troublemakers. And I have to tell you, that's just a horrible smell of neo-fascism, and I dislike it intensely.
Jason, I'm going to ask if we can bring in Iain. Iain had his hand up.
Sure.
Iain, one of the things that I read from the Pete Wishart's thing was that all of you have little to offer to the Indy debate. Now, it strikes me as strange that we're having a debate where you're not allowed to speak.
Well, I think what I've got to say about this is, firstly, the reason why I am an SNP bad blogger is because the SNP have been acting very badly. And the reason that I'm writing stuff against the SNP is because they had tried to secretly remove from ordinary members of the party a whole range of powers that are absolutely crucial and make it worthwhile being a member of the party. And without these powers, what's the point? If you're not allowed to pick the SNP candidate for your own area where you live and where you're a member of the party, where they decide who's on the shortlist, where they control and can get rid of local candidates who would be excellent candidates, then somebody needs to speak up about that, because that's frankly not right. And I'm surprised that someone like Pete Wishart, who's been an MP for all these years, chose this particular argument to go on the wrong side with. Because the first rule of politics is, if you've got a brain in your head, you try to defend what's right and what you can stand up and explain to people is right. Nobody can explain to me why, for instance, if you take this conference, the remit back, which has traditionally been there for generations at SNP conferences, because it gives delegates the opportunity, if they're not entirely happy with something, the opportunity to vote for that instead of rejecting it. They weren't even taking the chance of allowing the remit back to exist. Now, you don't tell me you can't have that there electronically. Of course you can. If you look at the conference, and I've got some concerns about the conference, because it started off by saying they had about 3,000 delegates. But I've been watching the voting on these resolutions, these apple pie motions. Rarely do the number of delegates voting go any higher than 1,500. So where are this missing 1,500 delegates? Or do they just turn up on voting for the new NEC? Because they're not taking a part in the conference. As far as I can see, there's certainly, I would suggest, hundreds missing. And that's a serious concern. The other thing that I would like to know, and nobody in the SNP seems prepared to tell me, is how many of the delegates at this year's conference are what I would describe as the payroll vote. In other words, MPs, MSPs, employees of these people. I reckon it runs into a great many hundred people. And again, that deeply influences the influence ordinary party members can have on the outcome of a whole range of different matters. So I think there's a lot of questions need to be asked about the basic democracy in the SNP, and that's what I'm doing, because someone needs to do it.
Iain, let me bring in the boy from Barrhead, if I may. Ronnie,
oh yeah, my pal.
Your next door neighbour.
Absolutely. I invited him to lunch until I discovered he lived in Catalonia.
I would have come too. I tell you, when I come, I'm choking for some good Scottish fare, I can assure you. I would just like to firstly sort of answer the first question where Pete Wishart saying that I hate the SNP and I'm of no use to the Indy debate. If I hate the SNP so much, I wouldn't be here today talking to you. As apart from anything else, everyone that follows me or knows me knows my other great love and passion is the football. And the beloved Rangers are playing at this moment, and instead of me sitting next door in front of my television, I'm actually here with you, this band of rogues discussing things that are about our nation. And as you point out, I am in Catalonia. I have a very good life here. I don't need to. I mean, I've still got a boat in Scotland. I've still got a house in Scotland. But I could actually do without this. I don't need to do it. I do it because I want to, and because I love my country. I want what's best for it. Now, even in this room, we don't all agree with each other on certain different aspects of how we get there and what we do to get there. And once we get there, but the easy thing to be very popular, and some of our fellow bloggers do it, is to follow the party line, be very sycophantic, and you'll never have any hassle, and you'll get, maybe a column in the National and things like that. You'll maybe get treated differently. It's harder and braver to say, well, I don't think this is right. And that's all I've ever done. I'm not trying to derail independence. It's what I've done all my life. I believe in it passionately. And do I get everything right all the time? Absolutely not. But I'm giving you my honest opinion every time. And that's what I'm doing. If Pete Wishart doesn't like it, or anyone else, I'm sorry. But that's my opinion. That's all it is.
Stuart Campbell of Wings once said that he said it to me privately. When I asked him if he was going to publish something that was a negative about the SNP, he said, no, I really don't like publishing anything that's anti-SNP anyone. And he didn't do it. And I noticed he didn't do it for a long time. It wasn't until he started to wonder about the integrity of Nicola Sturgeon that he then investigated a bit more, probably got some inside information, and it's his belief, thought that she wasn't playing fair, let me put it that way. And so he's now reached the point where he's attacking the SNP because he believes that the hierarchy there is actually anti-independence. They are undermining independence. And I kept wondering what he meant until I realized that they are currently the only party in Scotland. So if you're Scots, Polish, English, anything living in Scotland, and you see the onslaught that's coming our way of the neoliberalism, the neo-fascism from Boris and his gang, you've only got Scotland as a sanctuary. So you're going to be voting for the SNP no matter what they do. And I think that's the answer why no matter what the SNP appears to do that is negative, its popularity goes up. I wrote to somebody today and said, if the SNP started beheading non-believers in George Square in Glasgow, they would still get a huge popularity rise in the polls because they are the only gateway to independence. And that, in a serious way, is really unhealthy. We don't actually have an opposition. And I'm not referring to the weaklings of the Labour Party, and the ventriloquist dummies of the Tory party that are thrust upon us. I'm talking about another party or parties that are fully supportive of independence. We don't actually have a choice. So, the SNP could come out tomorrow with bringing back hanging. And as today, when some of their resolutions were passed with only 1,200 people, I would be a really worried man that might become the policy of the Scottish government because there isn't that balance there anymore. So I have anxieties, and it reminded me finally why I believe in referenda, because let's say that there was a movement to bring back hanging. There was 2 or 3 grisly murders in Scotland, and it whipped up that kind of mood for vengeance. And an SNP member brought up a bill to bring back hanging. It might be Hamza, for all I know. He might still be there in 10 years' time. Then suddenly it becomes law. You have to put that thing to a referenda. I'd be happy to see a new Scotland having as a matter of process referenda for various things at various times. I don't have a problem with that. But I have a problem with the SNP currently being as negative as it is, where it's even attacking members of the public. I mean, I regard myself as a private citizen, but it still have this worry and anxiety. So I'm in agreement with all the gentlemen here that we have every right to stand up and say, something's wrong, we need to fix it.
Jason, you're muted at the moment. If I can bring you in.
Well, I would love to sort of recap, but starting off from where Peter left off when he was talking about Pete Wishart being a good guy. And just to remind anyone watching and listening that this is not about Pete Wishart being a bad guy or us hating the SNP. I don't think Pete Wishart's a bad guy. I would tend to approach most people who I don't really know with a sense of positive regard. And of course, I don't hate the SNP, but I will be honest, and it's what I owe my readers and anyone else who I have any influence on is some level of my honesty. And my honesty is I do not trust the SNP. That doesn't mean I don't trust it as a party or as a mechanism that it can't improve. It's made up of lots of people, and the fact that these election conferences ongoing shows us that this is a process that will change the party, may change the party, but as it currently stands with the present leadership in its present state, I don't trust it. The reason I don't trust it is because of this anti-democratic, proto-fascist, authoritarian mood that we're experiencing. Anyone who, even in Ireland, people I would come into contact with, even the media here was talking about the hate crime bill. For goodness sake, I mean, this was creeping authoritarianism. Anytime members of the public have any form of disagreement with the party, we have this. We even have a word for it, and the independence movement is now well aware. We're almost like the Germans, the Scots have a word, wheesht, that we are not allowed to dissent. Now, dissent, and that, I come from that generation where I understand what blogger really means, that we wear tinfoil hats, we believe in conspiracy theories, we're all a bunch of nutters. But that is not to forget that as members of the public, we have a right to comment. We are the people who will influence votes. We ourselves are voters. And what we see time and again is an effort, for consistent effort from within the SNP to shut us up. Now, there may be perfectly good reasons, and I understand Peter's always playing devil's advocate here. There may be perfectly good reasons to be intolerant and to shut people up. Some people, ought to be quiet a lot more. Sometimes I'm one of them. But when you have a consistent treatment from a party of the public asking people to be quiet, to sit down, to follow orders, this is really, really disturbing. My own experience, goes back further than this. It goes even to Humza Yousaf's treatment of those on the border at the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak, that we were racists, that these people were racists. Then we have, all of these accusations of intolerance and bigotry and Anglophobia and what have you. And it is always used as a tool of suppression. Any form of dissent is to be suppressed. When I did my last talking tour of Scotland, I was arrested by who I suspect were MI5 after Mary Todd got involved with the Daily Mail, using half-truths and lies about the situation in Ireland with the Good Friday Agreement and Brexit. And I'm seeing this constant use of political personalities, politicians within the SNP to shut us up. And that is, to echo what everyone else is saying here, that is why I am angry. I am sick to my back teeth of the party that, as we've all acknowledged, we have to vote for because there is no alternative, telling us to be quiet. That's not on.
Gareth, can I let Peter in first, please? He's been signalling.
Carry on.
Peter.
I come at new people in a rather different way from Jason. I approach people I don't know with distrust and dislike and animosity until they prove their worth otherwise. But we're in danger of overstating things here. All this stuff about the SNP, the hierarchy, the leadership being anti-independence, and some of this stuff about Nazi-like tendencies, fascist-like tendencies, it's kind of overstating things a bit. There's a big underlying question here about who speaks for the party. And there's one or two people who think they speak for the party. Pete Wishart is one of them. Alan Smith is another. They seem to think that they speak for the membership. But it's probably a mistake to personalise this. Usually when I refer to this, I talk about the factions or the tendencies that these two guys have come to represent, and we have to be careful, because we just have to recognise that these are threads of thought within a party which is vast and wide. And they represent particular tendencies within that party. They are not representative of the party as a whole. So the kind of things that we're seeing from and hearing from Messrs. Wishart and Smith are not representative of the party. No more than anything that I say is representative of the party.
But the unionist press thinks it's representative.
Yeah, the unionist press, Gareth, you know as well as I do, the British media will say what it's going to say, regardless of anything we say. We can't constantly go around looking over our shoulders, worrying about what the British press is going to say. We certainly, the worst kind of censorship, the most insidious kind of censorship is self-censorship, especially the kind of self-censorship that is imposed on you by the likes of the British press, where you're going around all the time worrying about what you can say and what you can't say. No, just speak out, speak up.
Well, I've never written anything, any essay derogatory of any member of the SNP. What I have done is written 3 glowing essays on Nicola Sturgeon. In particular, I followed her journey to Ireland, to Dublin, and meeting the parliamentarians there, which was hardly reported in the British press, the Scottish press, let alone the English press. But I usually pick at the targets I pick on are the anti-independence MPs. And I've always believed that you have to find a balance somewhere. They can't all be bad, as you say, Pete. So one looks for something they've done, something they've accomplished that's done good for a lot of people. And then you move into the kind of negativity and weaknesses in their argument, and you try and take them apart. So people in the SNP leadership have got no right to include me in any kind of denunciation of people who are undermining the SNP. But the other aspect we're still to touch on is their popularity has been worked so carefully and so well that if anyone on Twitter, for example, even dares to make a fun remark, let's say of Pete Wishart, calling him comfy slippers or whatever. I mean, I never nicknamed him anything, but he's called wishy-washy because of his public pronouncements. You will get a flood of SNP fans and faithful absolutely jumping all over you for daring to make these comments. That's really not a healthy, open, democratic process. And it wasn't like that in 2014, not even in 2015, once we got over the shock that we had sold our country a second time down the river.
Can I just agree?
Can we bring in Iain, Gareth, please?
Can I just agree with part of that, Gareth? I mean, I was encouraged today with 2 events. Mike Russell gave an excellent interview this morning on the Andrew Marsh, on Scottish politics today, where he was arguing that, you know, we've really got to be open to all possible methods of achieving a referendum. And, you know, we really should tolerate alternative views. First time I've heard that for a while coming from MD. Later on, online, I read an article by Tommy Shepherd, again, arguing much the same thing, that we really needed more tolerance in the party so that people could feel confident to speak out if they did hold an alternative view. And that's the thing, I think. I mean, I was away from politics for a long time while I was a consul for Estonia. But I think that's the key difference I noticed since coming back. There's far less tolerance in the party. There's far less debate in the party over a whole range of different issues. You know, the leadership come down with a line and then you're expected just to fall in behind that, irrespective of your own personal view. And that was never the way in the SNP when I was active. We used to have phenomenal conferences where, you know, different sides would argue very strenuously, but politely and respectfully. And, you know, people changed their minds. I often went to conference with what I thought was a pretty firm view. And in the course of a debate, because of the quality of that debate, my position either tempered or indeed had swapped from one side to the other because of the quality of the debate. And I think that's missing. And the great thing about that was because it was all argued out in advance, events like National Assembly and all the rest of it, by the time it became policy, it had been examined from every possible angle. And as a result of that, it was a much stronger policy, much more resilient, much more robust, and it didn't give hostages to fortune, which I think quite often happens these days, where Gareth's already mentioned the hate crime bill. I mean, that's a vote loser. Don't kid yourself.
Iain, the hate crime bill is preposterous.
Exactly.
I have no idea of the intellect who came up with that, but whoever it was really shouldn't be in the position that they hold now. That's what I feel about it. It's so bad and so awful.
Yep, I agree entirely with that, Gareth. And I think also, you know, GRA, I mean, I'm sympathetic to some of these arguments, but my goodness, what are we doing using all our time up defending or building a case for that at the same time as ignoring the overwhelming reason the party exists, which is to drive independence forward. All our efforts at this stage should be concentrated in that. I'm not arguing we become a single issue party, because there is some weakness in that, particularly when you're the government of Scotland. But I think we've got to get our priorities in the right order. And I just don't see that at the moment.
Can I bring in Roddy before we move on back to you, Peter, if that's okay?
Yeah, I'm actually enjoying listening to you guys. There's a lot of things I agree with and some things I don't. But you know, I think in many ways we've become what we despised. We've become we call us tartan Tories. I think we're more like tartan Labour, where we worry more about process and we worry more about factions than we are actually about our core policy. And if you take what's actually us here today, guys, we're here because a member of our party said we hated the party and that we were harmful to the independence movement. And instead of us talking about our core principle and our core goal, we are talking about all sorts of other related matters. And I think the party is doing something similar. So I would love us to get back to what we do best. And yes, we do need policies. You're absolutely right, Iain. But we don't need to get bogged down and put policies before the main event. And the British state has never been weaker. The British state has never been more ready to be pushed over. The door is rotten to the core. The hinges are hanging off. And we're too busy talking about how we're going to plan our garden outside instead of kicking that door down and getting in. And I want to see us getting back to that. I don't want to fall out with Pete Wishart or anyone else, but there are some things that are not right. And I think it's incumbent upon us to highlight what we see and put that. And I have every time every one of us puts out a blog, we're putting out there for scrutiny, because as we know better than anyone, if we get something wrong, even as I've talked to Jason often about, even if we get a comma in the wrong place, you've suddenly got the grammar police going, well, I couldn't read that because I was affronted when you put the comma there. You're all right, I'll have a sorry with that. I've just solved world poverty, but you didn't like my comma. So we get held to scrutiny, and that's the way it should be. I go back to it, and I say it for all of you guys, as I say, we don't all agree on different things, but I know that every one of you, when you write what you write and say what you say, you actually believe it, and you're not doing it to the detriment of our movement. You're doing it to improve our movement and put your tuppence worth in to try and get us to where we all want to go to. And I want to see more open debate, more transparency. And I hope this conference this weekend throws us up an NEC that gets us back to doing what we should be doing, which is attacking the British Unionists and not attacking ourselves.
I thought.
Can I throw you all a question there? You've got one approach which says Section 30. You've got another approach which says referendum held by the Scottish Parliament. That's more in the direction of not complaining about what's going wrong, but about how we put things right. Can I draw you on that? Section 30 or a referendum arranged by the Scottish Parliament without reference to Westminster?
Oh, I'd be delighted. Although that's what I'll just finish. Somebody else go.
I think that we should use it.
Sorry.
See, everybody's excited when you say that.
There was a moment of silence. We were all being very
He did say I was next. Right.
I rest my case.
I actually wanted to, it's almost like it was scripted, because I was going to pick up on something that Iain said, and then it follows on directly from what Roddy was talking about us being open to scrutiny. I make rules for myself, and one of these rules is that I will never publish anything that I'm not prepared to defend. I sit there and I think about it before I hit that publish button, and I will not publish anything on Twitter or anything else. That's why I have a 3-drink rule. I will not go online on social media, anything, if I've had 3 drinks or more. As soon as I get to 3 drinks, that's it, stop. I'm always open to scrutiny, and I am prepared to defend things. And this is picking up on what Iain said, because he mentioned something about making a case and defending a case. That is precisely what they do not do. And that is precisely why we're getting the kind of reaction that we get from Pete Wishart and Alan Smith. And the people that they have come to represent. Let's not personalise this too much. These two guys, by their own doing, have become synonymous with these trends of thought. They will not defend their position. They state positions. They say, this is the right way. Now, coming back to what Mike wanted to talk about, they say, this is the right way of going about it. And that's it. And if you disagree, I'll block you, and I'll go online and I'll call you a troublemaker and intolerant and whatever. The one thing I will not do is defend my position. When Pete Wishart first published all that nonsense about optimal time, I and a great many others asked him a lot of questions about that. Perfectly polite, perfectly sensible, perfectly reasonable questions. He never answered one of them. And he rather, if you persisted with the questions, he just blocked you. Whatever platform was, he just blocked you. Never answered any questions. And he's representative of a large swathe in the party who insist on this, what we, for shorthand, call the Section 30 route. They insist that that is the right way, while there is another trend of thought in the party, which I represent, which says it is absolutely not the right way. The Section 30 process, by design, cannot lead to a free and fair referendum. It cannot. And the people who say Section 30 is the only way, cannot explain how it will lead to a free and fair referendum. And that is why they get all defensive and start lashing out at the likes of us, because we're asking awkward questions. And hey, If bloggers like us are there for anything at all, it's for asking awkward questions.
Go on, Jason, and then Gareth.
Well, when we talk about optimal time, I remember this entire discussion, well, I suppose it's still going on, at the very beginning of the independence debate, as I remember it in 2012, someone who I can't remember made a wonderful allusion to planting trees, that the best time to plant a tree is yesterday. The next best time is today. You know, not, you know, putting this down the road and down the road. And as to this thing about the Section 30, first of all, a Section 30, I was discussing this with Roddy quite recently, a Section 30 order first started as a matter of soft law. It is not a matter of constitutional law. That we wrote it into the paper that gave us the Edinburgh Agreement and gave us the first referenda, or the first referendum. And thereafter, it has become, you know, it has taken on the sort of garb of law. And now through the Holyrood Parliament, our own government, an SNP in government, made it a matter of law that we have to offer a Section 30 to London. And that is a direct contradiction of this notion of Scots sovereignty. That if the Scottish people are truly sovereign, which I believe they are, and I think we're all in agreement that the Scots ourselves are sovereign, then asking permission to exercise that sovereignty undermines that very judicial understanding of sovereignty. In fact, makes an idiot of the entire process. And no, I think that like any revolutionary process, like any independence campaign from the British Empire or from Britain or the British Commonwealth throughout history, there is not one single example of asking permission. In fact, we have it recently from Barbados, where the governor of Barbados said that they were tired of loitering on colonial premises. There's no hint in Barbados of asking permission from the Crown or from London. And why should we Scots, who are sovereign by the constitution of our population, why should we be expected to ask permission from London in this, you know, fictive union of equals?
Absolutely.
Gareth, on you go.
I remember a while back, I write car articles for car magazines. It started off as a hobby and then suddenly realized I could get paid for it. And one day I read one by a car journalist on a new sports car. And he said, looking at its design outside and in, he said, I can't make up my mind whether I like it or I don't like it. To which I replied, I've just spent £5 on this magazine, pal, and you don't have an opinion. Why did I buy this magazine? So when an SNP politician turns around and says to me, okay, Grousebeater, you feel that going for a Section 30 will just get rejected again by Boris and his gang. What's your answer? Well, my answer is really simple. Excuse me, I voted for you. You're being paid to come up with those answers, not me. You guys should be getting together. So when I picked up some of the debate today, I was more than impressed by Roger Mullen, who in a very short, concise speech said, we really should be preparing our institutions for independence. We should have committees, you know, groups, whatever, the experts saying, you know, as Whitehall and Westminster are sending out now, here's what happens when we are not a member of the EU starting on the 1st of January. If you're a business, you better do X, Y, and Z now if you've not done it. Well, we seem to be getting to that point now. And I would be saying to our SNP, where's the preparation? Because I have never actually said, I want this date for a referendum. What my consistent argument has been for the past 3 years is, what is the SNP doing to actually convince people of the benefits of full civil and constitutional rights? I can't see it. I see people getting lots of selfies, I see all that kind of thing happening, but I don't actually see, and I haven't managed to find the preparation that's absolutely necessary from a nation absolutely intent on getting independence. It's good money well spent, even if another referendum isn't won. We've done the homework, we've prepared the ground. Just as Jason said, well, if you're going to plant a tree, you better plant it in good ground. You better prepare the earth properly. You better nourish that tree. Well, the SNP are bereft of that. And that has been my whole attack, which of course is immediately misinterpreted by fans of the party who then say, I am demanding a referendum tomorrow and it's too early.
Iain, on you go, my friend.
Well, I've got to agree with Gareth there again. I mean, I'll speak more about this in my later discussion about Estonia. But one of the great secrets of Estonian independence, and one of the reasons why it's been so immensely successful, is that they were very well prepared. They had an exact plan. They knew the minute they got their independence, here's what we're going to do. And there's a period after independence, which the Estonians describe as the period of extraordinary politics, because the public expect a lot of change and the resistance to that change is at its lowest. So what they did, they introduced machine gun measures and they came in one after the other, and the opposition were still reeling from the first. By the time they'd already implemented about 20, because they were well organised, they knew what they were going to do, and they implemented it. And that, of course, is part of the process of winning an election, winning a referendum, knowing what you're going to do, because you can then argue that in the course of convincing others that this is the route we should go. Now, to get back to the original question, I can see no disadvantage at all in using the constituency vote in May as a referendum on independence. We've got absolutely nothing to lose by doing that. I know people start talking about Catalonia and all the rest, but the difference is, at the moment, all we can talk about is polls. And nobody outside Scotland's got any interest or knowledge in these polls. However, if we use a major election and we win that major election, that's a very different message internationally. We have then got a democratic mandate specifically on independence. And I think that changes the argument. And I don't understand why people are scared to go down that route. I mean, most members that I know think it's a great idea.
I absolutely 100% agree. I was going to say some of us don't agree in some things, but I know that certainly Peter, like myself, is totally and always has been opposed to this Section 30. And I have been. I think it's an abomination why we should be asking any other person for permission to do what we, the people, want to do. And I've been advocating for quite some time now that May should be a plebiscite election. And I believe in that for several reasons. One, if we were just to hold some kind of other referendum, then the unions could boycott it and try and let it lose any kind of credibility with the outside world and internally. They won't boycott a Holyrood election. They just can't. It's too much of a risk for them to end up with no representation at Holyrood. It also gets around the legal question, because what can be more legal than the 5 years cycle, which is written in stone, is in our non-written constitution, but is inside the Scotland Act. Now, I'm sure the legal people know, say, well, there's nothing that says you can do, you can turn that into a plebiscite. Well, we don't know. And I go with what, similarly, what Joanna Cherry was saying, do it, and then let them take us to court. No need for us to take them. Let them take us to court or do what they want. But what it does do is send out the message to the world and to the rest of Europe in particular that we have made a decision, the Scottish people, the sovereign Scottish people. And, you know, I don't think after Brexit and all the nonsense that's been going on, that our English neighbours have got a lot of credibility, or the UK's got a lot of credibility in Europe, and not just the European Union, but beyond. So that would be my argument how we do it. And it gets round of boycotts, legality, and it's the sovereign will of the people of Scotland.
Somebody asked me a very good question the other day. They said, how did New Zealand get its independence? And I had to think about that. And when I had a look at it, well, they managed it by stealth, step by step, over years. They got themselves onto various represented onto various national committees, big time, until one day they had representation at the United Nations, associate representation, by which point the common market appeared. And it was time for the UK to join the common market. You'll remember that. And in order to join the common market, we had to dump New Zealand. Remember? All that wool and butter that we got from New Zealand. Their big trading partner, the one person they thought they could trust, that bond of trust was broken when the British government said, well, sorry, we don't need you guys anymore. We'll be trading with all these other guys in Europe. So at that point, it was time to give New Zealand its full and utter independence, even though it's still got, a Union Jack stuck somewhere on its psyche. But it did it simply by going out and acting like an independent nation, whereas we're going round and round in circles. You really had to applaud our First Minister getting to Ireland. You had to applaud her sitting in front of a United Nations committee. It didn't do very much, and I didn't think much of the argument she put forward. She seems much better informed in Holyrood than she did at that committee. She did go and speak to people in the EU, but she just, or the EC, she just forgot to tell them that Scotland was a sovereign state. The people were sovereign. She forgot various things. But that may be because, and this is one of my criticisms, we are looking at a one-man band. And I keep asking, outside Mike Russell, who else is doing anything? Who has been delegated to do this or that or the other? So New Zealand is a good example, but then everyone will tend to look at Ireland, and Jason will probably agree with this. They didn't give a damn what British people thought about their ambitions to get their autonomy, their independence back. They saw their history. They knew their history. They knew how brutal the British state can be when it wants to keep territory. So those people that say, let's go for a legal Section 30, and they look at it idealistically and say, it will be passed because Boris will not be able to defy us. Well, look how Boris has reacted to the Chagos Islanders, when the whole of the United Nations unanimously said to Britain, get your backsides out of there. You stole it off the islanders. Give it back to them. Have they done that? No, they haven't. So we better be prepared for a lot more things, including passive resistance. And I'm waiting for the day when our MPs in Parliament, the cradle of democracy, quote unquote, walk out of the House of Commons forever, and they work from this end. That to me would be the first time that we will be able to frighten the daylights, the living daylights out of the British state. We haven't done that yet. That's because I see an SNP that's just too timid.
Yeah, can I follow on from that? One of the reasons why MPs down in Westminster perhaps can't come back up to stand in Scotland as a result of the decisions taken by the NEC. I don't know whether we're going to see it. Maybe say to people, this is being recorded on Sunday evening. So all the votes cast and who might be in place in the future, we don't quite know at this moment. But a changed NEC, will a changed NEC change some of the thoughts that you all have on whether the SNP are going in the right direction?
Well, my view is definitely it will improve things. I mean, it's quite astonishing. As someone who served in the NEC for 13 or 14 years, to me, it's quite astonishing that there's never been a discussion about independence or independence strategy on this premier committee within the party for about 18 months. Now, that just is inexcusable, because the activists are all sitting. I mean, before this COVID hit, I was on a speaking tour across Scotland, and I was picking up everywhere I was going a level of enthusiasm to campaign, but absolutely no support or no messaging coming from the centre to encourage them to do so. And I think that is a big, big problem. That lies right at the door. And if you speak to people who are on the NEC, they tell you it was dominated by trying to make sure they could control the vetting and the selection procedures and get them away from the ordinary membership. And I mean, I just don't get the logic of that. I mean, how does someone sitting in Edinburgh, know what's the best candidate for Inverclyde, for instance? You know, the whole idea of local democracy is you pick your representative to represent your party in a local area. Nobody knows better than the local constituency association. Nobody. And that's a principle that I think every ordinary member of the SNP should fight to defend, because that was a huge mistake and it caused a lot of ill feeling. And as does a whole lot of the centralised things that go on. I mean, it was quite incredible when Dumbarton, for instance, were cut off because the NEC wanted to force them to do certain things that they didn't want to do. One of which, by the way, was ignoring MD that wasn't online and wasn't going to give 150 of them a vote in the selection of their candidate. When they get cut off, they wanted to talk to other branches and other constituencies, and they couldn't, because there's not a list available of who the office bearers are in any constituency. Everyone is kept in ignorance. It's like Topshop not being able to phone a branch outside their town. And I mean, it's deliberate, it's intentional. The whole idea is to make sure there's no communication other than what comes from the centre. And that's not a healthy way to run any party.
But that's just part of the attack on liberalism, isn't it? Where if you're chairman, you say, of course my institution is fully democratic. Look, here's the agenda for the next board meeting. And of course, you've chosen, you and the treasurer who's trying to hide money that you've lost, you and the treasurer have actually laid out the agenda, which has narrowed right down what can be discussed. And you hand it out to the members of the board and you say, well, here you are, discuss as much as you want. As you see, you're absolutely free to express yourselves. Yeah, and within that kind of narrow limit. Yeah, well, that's everywhere. And of course, that whole process is dominated by the British press, which decides what is important for today's news. And in spite of Tim Davie, the new Director General of the BBC, making one of the changes that I suggested a couple of years ago to the Scottish head of BBC to cut out, to stop their journalists from using Twitter, and exposing their real political views and insulting viewers. I think you should consider widening that much to include things like reading out the British press, every morning on the morning news or the Sunday news, Andrew Marr. And so here's today's newspaper, Sunday newspapers. Look, the SNP are a pile of crap. Well, let's have a look at this, Well, who is this guy writing a pile of crap? Who is this? Why am I being forced to read an English newspaper that is determined to keep a piece of territory because it's the colonial power? So there's a whole lot of things in terms of our communication that narrow down severely what we can say and what we can discuss. And you guys probably know as much as I do that for years, it really wasn't the right thing to talk about being in favor of independence. You could actually lose your promotion and sometimes your job. And I saw that happen at the BBC, in BBC Scotland, where I would get, as an executive producer, I would get the annual files on staff. And when this person was discussing the Scottish National Party too much, teaching people of its policies. So Gareth, don't promote him onto any front programs at the moment. He's got one series that he should be doing. Leave him with that. It's endemic. That's how the bully nation, the dominant nation, keeps power. It just reduces down what it is we can all talk about. That the things that right-minded people would talk about, not those independentistas.
Jason, in you come.
I'm willing to pass the chair. I've sort of momentarily forgot what I was going to say.
Okay, I saw you mute.
I hope that wasn't me.
No. I just lost my train of thought. That's okay.
I'll tell you where we should go. We've just about run up for an hour, gentlemen. I don't know whether you realise that or not.
Why is there no women on this panel?
Yeah, this manel. We're on a manel again.
We're all in for it. It's bad enough being chastised publicly by Mr. Wishart. We're going to get hounded to hell.
I remember what I was going to say. It was about the NEC. And will my attitude change towards the SNP? Well, my attitude is always going to remain the same. I'm always going to have or operate with a hermeneutic of suspicion against every institution that represents the country I love. Now, I will, no matter how the NEC changes or doesn't change, I will always remain suspicious of those in power. And I do hope that it does change. And I hope that it takes us in the direction that we want to go. And I hope that things improve, at least from my perspective. The SNP, like any other institution or group of, it's essentially a group of people. It has the ability to change. And if it changes in a direction that I see it will move or is moving us closer to independence or closer to a referendum, then I'll put my shoulder to it. I have done in the past. I reserve the right to be the opposition to the SNP and to be, one of their, drum beaters. But they've got to show me, the SNP as an institution has to show me and Scotland that it is pushing where we want to go. And then absolutely, I will shout "Wheesht for Indy" and I will wave a saltire and I'll turn off my brain and I'll do what the rest of social media would like me to do. Absolutely, anything to get us independence. But while they're not taking us there, then yeah, no, I will be vociferous in my opposition to the SNP.
Roddy, would you like to come in?
Yeah,
Sorry, you missed your football, my friend.
What can I say? I hope for the best. To go to the NEC, that depends obviously on what happens. And if we get a new NEC with more Dot Jessamines and fewer other people who I won't name, then I think, the answer is it will make a huge difference. And if we can get back to where the NEC is actually the governing part of the party, and what I think it was Peter or Gar, someone said, we have become a presidential type party. I mean, one of the things that's going on just now is we can't have a referendum because Nicola's busy with COVID. Well, I don't think she should be facing that up every day anyway. She's got a health minister and she's got health officials, I think, but that's another story. We could have an hour on that. But the fact that when she's busy, then apparently everything stops, I find ridiculous. So I hope the NEC come in and change things. And there's other matters and questions that have got to be asked that we haven't even touched on today, like the inquiry and other things that have been going on off stage that have been a disgrace to the party and this party I love. So the answer to your question is, if we get the right NEC, I think it'll make a huge difference.
I've carefully kind of steered away from inquiry, Alex Salmond, other things, Roddy, not to avoid them in any way, shape or form, but this was to be your platform. So with an hour nearly past, can I invite each one of you to give us a final thought on where you think we'll be, let's say by not May next year, but by the end of April next year as we approach the 6th of May? What may have happened?
My feeling at the moment is that not very much will have happened. I've been quite adamant that change needs to be forced on the SNP. They're not doing what's required. They keep banging on about opinion polls, but there is nothing that connects that public support for independence with the democratic process. There's nothing that connects that public support to an actual vote. The process isn't there. They're talking about the Section 30 process to connect it to a referendum, but it doesn't, it can't. And I can't actually see that changing unless there's a significant political force comes on the scene which can force the SNP to change. The SNP is too solid in its position, as we've all acknowledged, it has to be. It will take a significant political force. I think the best hope that we have is the initiative that's been taken by AUOB, the AUOB Assembly, to try and bring the Yes movement together. I think only the Yes movement united can create the kind of political force in Scotland that can force the SNP to change, because it's the SNP must adopt a manifesto for independence so that we can endorse that manifesto come the election. They have to get the right. It's not a case of using the election as a plebiscite. That is a bit dubious. I'm very, very wary of that. It's not sufficient. It's not strong enough. It doesn't quite have the credibility. But if the SNP were going into that election on a manifesto for independence, where they undertook to take certain actions, then it would make a difference. But unless we get that manifesto for independence from the SNP, we are not going to be any further forward. We're not going anywhere.
Anyone want to come in?
Well, I would say that where are we going to be after May? We don't have a crystal ball. The only measure we have for predicting the future with any accuracy is the rear view mirror. And the rear view mirror is not very good. We have had golden opportunity, open doors. As has already been pointed out, the British state is weaker now than it has been in its history of empire. And we've used COVID-19 at a time where, yes, Cymru have quadrupled their membership. We've hidden behind this excuse that, no, this virus stops democracy, it stops public discussion, it stops everything. And yet here on Zoom, we are showing that to be an absolute fib. You know, the rear view mirror says that the SNP at its current state and leadership have obfuscated, they've delayed, they've carried around trying to save England from its own democracy. That was the priority at the high point of Brexit. You know, now that was an opportunity, as Ireland recognised, and the Irish Commissioner in Brussels pointed out that this was the opportunity for Irish unification, and Ireland has exploited that, Wales has exploited that, we've sat in our hands. You know, this broken down vehicle has sat there, you know, muttering. So that, you know, I can only say that our rear view mirror, if that's an accurate prediction of the shape of things after May, then we're going to be exactly where we are. The atrophy and infighting will continue and things will break down until something like a different political force or an improved SNP decides to get us motivated and moving. But, you know, until that happens, we're just sitting here in this broken down jalopy.
Please, Gareth, carry on, and we'll follow on with Iain and Roddy. Final words.
Well, if you want me to predict anything, it will be that the Tory party will introduce a bill for federalism. And in it, it will have a clause that says there can be no referenda for, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years at a time. We know they'll be working on some kind of federalist scheme. And one of the benefits of doing that, no matter how stupid and inappropriate it is to Scotland as a sovereign state, they will be banking on the federalism of each region of England, turning to Scotland and saying, don't upset the apple cart. We can all get, you know, more powers for our region, but you guys have to be part of that. So there's method in their madness. So that's what I expect them to do. And probably, what is it that the need in the House of Lords? Is it a majority of 13? It'll just go through very quietly. They've already outwitted us at least twice with bills. So that's what I think will happen. That federalism will suddenly appear, and it will be what the British press decide is the important thing to debate.
Iain, final thoughts?
Well, sadly, I think Gareth's probably on the right track there. But I think if I'm going to try and finish in an optimist note, I would say that I think time's running out for the SNP. I think the second vote in May, you know, they're not going to be able to play both votes SNP the same way as they did the last time. An awful lot of members have no intention of using their second vote for the SNP. And again, I agree with Peter that we should not ignore the significance of the rest of the Yes movement getting organised and coming together. So, I mean, I think it will hold steady until May, but if there's not immediate action immediately following May, then I think you'll find that, you know, people will leave and move to one of these other organisations having given up. Because, I mean, the only reason a lot of people that are in the SNP are still there today is because there's no choice about where to go, no credible place, and they don't want to damage the chances of independence this side of the May elections. But the minute those elections are out the road, if the SNP haven't got properly organised, then I think they've got really big problems coming.
Peter, I'm going to ask you to refrain. I saw you shaking your head. I think anyone who reads your blog knows your opinion of alternative indie parties. So can we just take that as noted, Roddy?
Well, I think having read, for example, today's article by Alan Smith in the National, where he rubbished Joanna Cherry's alternative route to independence, I think that the words are important, as we know, and the words that Nicola's used and the words that everyone in the SNP has been very careful. You know, the referendum should happen next year. A referendum could happen next year. Never. It's not once have anyone come out and said it will happen. So I regrettably, when with a broken heart, think that we'll be where we are today if everything stays the same. The only hope I have, as I said in my last comments, is if we get a different NEC who really shape things up and move things along. Otherwise, I think it's the old carrot, the independence carrot and nothing. That's what I honestly believe, and that saddens me greatly.
Peter, let me bring it to a conclusion, my friend, please, if you would be kind enough. I'm going to let Dave have the last word on all of this, but I want to, one, thank you very, very much on behalf of myself and everyone who watches this. You proved Pete Wishart wrong. You can bring things to the indie debate that need to be brought to the indie debate. I want to answer Gareth's question. Why no ladies on the programme? Simple reason that we were doing a right to reply to Pete Wishart, and Pete Wishart chose you gentlemen as the weaker sex. We will have ladies on at some stage on the programme.
My wife will agree.
Dave, over to you, my friend.
I'd really like to thank you all for coming on at such short notice, guys. I know this all sort of arrived really, really quick yesterday, and getting your time to come out and do this has been much appreciated, especially to have got such a well-read group of guests. And I was expecting there would be more fireworks, but we've actually had a good debate tonight. Probably one that won't be able to get slagged off just as much as certain people might like to. So thanks very much for coming along and giving us the benefit of your expertise.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Dave should now switch off the recording, or we'll edit anything you want to say. Seriously, everyone, thank you very, very much.
I was
A pleasure.
told to come for an interview, but I still haven't got a job out of this.
Well, I was going to say about the question of the ladies in the new SNP.
Recording has gone off.